Welcome into Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolf here, going solo today, breaking down the injury updates on Jalen Brunson. Way better than you might think. He might actually play in the game tonight against Atlanta, plus updates on Julius Randle and OG Anunoby from our buddy Ian Begley of SNY, and a little bit of a scouting report on new Knick Shake Milton and what it means for the Knicks' potential playoff rotation next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode after you subscribed, of course. That way you never miss an episode. We are here for you guys 5 days a week. And Jalen Brunson apparently is here for you every day, almost, even if he has an injury that looks like he was about ready to lose his foot on the court the other day. So yeah, Gavin and I went over it on yesterday's show where we talked about, how grisly the injury looked. Obviously, everybody saw it. And yet the early, looks at it from doctors and, people on YouTube and whatever that, are sports medicine people looked at it and said, you know what, this doesn't look like a ACL or an Achilles or anything like that. It looks like he just had the nerve in his knee kicked somehow or kneed. And then, it kind of just gives you a sensation of not being able to move your lower half of your leg, basically, which is why he looked like his foot was limp and everything else. And the injury report seems to back that up. He is listed as questionable against the Hawks. So I know that questionable can mean a little something different, depending on what sports league that you're looking at. But questionable in basketball is that the player has roughly a 50-50 shot at playing. So, I mean, it's kind of an insane outcome given how bleak things were feeling the other day, that Jalen Brunson is at a 50-50 shot of playing in this game against the Hawks. But there still hasn't been any, I guess, like full diagnosis. Like the Knicks have not come out and said, like, yes, the nerve in his knee got hit weird, which is why it looked like his foot was going to fall off. So all we've seen so far is a knee contusion, which is just sort of doctor speak for a bruise or like an impact on the knee. So I guess they're just basically calling it a knee to knee at this point. And the Brunson got a bruise on the side, and that's pretty much it at the moment. So I guess the best we have to go on here is that the doctors on YouTube and on Twitter and all that, who basically said it was a bump to his nerve, which gave him like a dead leg. That's pretty much it. So either way, huge sigh of relief. I think maybe the Knicks ought to give him this game off. I not to say that I think that he's going to get hit on that same spot or whatever, but just in case he would, that probably wouldn't be great. So maybe just give him, a day, and then he can come back for the next game. I mean, this game against the Hawks anyway, like, I think you could probably survive. So the Hawks are 4-5 without Trae Young this year. He'll be out, which actually I guess is a slight improvement on their record. So I don't know. Maybe that's not a selling point, but either way, I mean, they're not exactly lighting the world on fire without him. They're also without Onyeka Okongwu. They also are coming off 2 straight losses to Brooklyn, and Brooklyn is not good. I mean, Brooklyn won those 2 games against the Hawks and then proceeded to lose to the Grizzlies, who are just basically a G League team at this point, thanks to all the injuries they're dealing with and the fact that they're more or less, they've threw the towel in once things hit the fan with Ja Morant. So I don't know. I think the Knicks of all games can entertain the idea of sitting Brunson and probably be okay in this game. Like, they will probably have a decent chance of winning. even without Jalen Brunson on the floor. So my thought would be sit him, but Brunson, if given the opportunity, will probably say, no, I feel good, I can play. Tibbs, there's a decent chance that he'll say, well, if you feel good, you can definitely play because we'd like to have you on the floor. But even if he does play, hopefully, hopefully the Knicks are able to stake out a big advantage in this one and he's able to, just play limited minutes a la what Hartenstein has been doing lately or something like that. So we'll see. But still, again, crazy to think that he can potentially be playing after how grisly that looked the other day. Then on the other injuries front, Ian Begley had some good updates on OG Anunoby and Julius Randle on SNY Sports Night. So on Randle, Begley basically said, as long as he's not having any setbacks in these workouts, he should be back later this month, middle of the month maybe. And then he noted on OG, as of late last week, he was a little behind Randle. He started shooting recently, but hadn't been cleared for contact. Wasn't doing everything Randle had been doing in his workouts, so you can maybe put Randle ahead of Anunoby in the race to come back. So I don't know. It seems to me like there's a decent shot that both these guys come back at almost the same time. It seems like they're both going through their rehab processes at about the same pace. So maybe Randle comes back one game before Anunoby or something like that. But I also think that there's I guess it's very similar in what they have to go through. Like both guys presumably have been able to stay in cardio shape. So both have probably been able to run and, keep their lateral exercise and lateral movement exercises going and all that stuff, but have just had to wait to ramp up things with their upper body. Randall with the shoulder that's messed up, and then Anunoby with the elbow. Obviously the elbow in terms of getting back to shooting work and contact work in the sense of wanting to like push off with your arm or whatever, probably a little more for him because he had an incision that has to heal. So that's the most important thing with Anunoby is making sure that that's fully healed because with the amount of motion a basketball player goes through, obviously if something's not totally healed, then you can tear it and, get right back to the point where you have to get it stitched up again and, be in bad shape that way. Whereas in Randall's case, it's kind of just waiting out as long as it takes for the strength to be good enough in that shoulder with if it was a partially torn labrum, whatever, like your body just does have if it's not fully torn, your body has means of repairing it, and essentially slapping a band-aid on it itself. And so it's, kind of just playing the waiting game, waiting for that. So I don't know. It seems to me like they're both getting pretty close though. Like Randall, if you listen to what he's apparently been doing in practice and kind of see some of the stuff coming out with that, it seems like he's pretty close. Like they're kind of just waiting to feel confident enough in that shoulder, but otherwise he's getting in some contact in workouts and is fully shooting and everything else. Luckily it's his off arm, it's not a shooting arm. So as long as he has enough strength where he feels confident to push off or like just hold his arm out and not feel like it's going to fall out, he should be good. And then Anunoby, I think it's going to come down to feeling confident that that incision and everything is fully healed on the elbow. But either way, I think the way I see it, there's probably two likely return dates for each of them. Either they're pretty good to go and travel with the team for the 4-game West Coast swing coming up. So that starts on March 14th. Or I could see a world where they just get held out until the Knicks are back home from that trip on March 23rd. But either way, I'd call it good news because even if they hit the late end of that timetable, they'd still have 13 games to warm up for the playoffs. So that's if they come back on March 23rd, there's still 13 games left until you hit the postseason. I think that's more than enough ramp up. That's both guys were playing really, really well before going down with the injuries. And so if everything still tracks and they're still able to just maintain their same mindset and everything else and their bodies feel good, then they should be good and things should be good for the playoffs, hopefully. Obviously we're still waiting on the Mitchell Robinson update as well, but Mitch himself has kind of been breaking that news, so we could just be one Snapchat away from knowing what Mitch is up to or one TikTok or whatever. So we'll obviously keep an eye out for that. But yeah, it seems like there's a lot of optimism for the injury front, which is again such a great thing to have as a Knicks fan at the moment, considering the other night. I think I could speak for everyone when we say there was a decent chance of thinking that nobody was going to be healthy and everything was going to suck, and the season was basically over because of Jalen Brunson's injury. So good news all around. And another good news: the Knicks signed Shake Milton. So I want to get into that in just a second, and about the impact he could potentially have, and just what he could bring to this team. This next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. And sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking the same thing this week. And the easy thing to say here in terms of the Knicks would be, hey, it was pretty depressing when I thought that my favorite team, might be completely killed by injuries this week, and that, the our overall viewing experience was not going to be fun and whatever else. But transparently, from a podcasting and, content creator perspective, there was a lot of stress for me about, like, oh man, if Brunson is out for a year and change, I mean, first off, I feel for him, but secondly, like, the thing that I work hard on, and the thing that, I do every day, this podcast, might suddenly not matter to people anymore. And that's the number one thing that I always struggle with that gives me anxiety, is like, if is what I'm doing mattering to people? Do people enjoy it? Is this something that people like, or am I just talking to nobody or whatever? So yeah, it's, to be vulnerable for a minute. There's always insecurities that come with that, and anxieties and everything else. And sometimes it can be good to talk about those things with a professional rather than just talking about it on a live read for for a podcast. So therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, or even my insecurities about podcasting. And it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. All right, and I'm back in to talk about Shake Milton here. And so he officially signed with the Knicks on Monday. And to my eye, this is kind of weird. I looked this up because I wasn't sure what I was missing here, but I thought he missed the playoff waiver cutoff of March 1st, because the news came out on March 2nd that he was being waived and was signing with the Knicks. Although maybe that was just uh Woj or whoever was just waiting to even announce he had been waived until they knew where he was going to sign. So maybe that was it. I don't know exactly the circumstances there that led to him being playoff eligible, even though the cutoff was supposed to be March 1st, I thought. But either way, according to Woj, he is playoff eligible, and as of yesterday, he officially signed with the Knicks. So presumably, if the Knicks find themselves in dire need of some help and don't want to play Deuce McBride 47 and a half minutes again, maybe they could give Shake Milton a little bit of run tonight to see how he feels. See how he looks on this team. He certainly was not having a good year with the Timberwolves, which is why they looked to upgrade his spot, and they went and got Monty Morris from Detroit. And then Detroit, released Shake Milton probably just as a favor, to be like, well, okay, it's fine. You want to go somewhere where you can hopefully win or whatever, and we don't have much need for you. So they wound up getting rid of him. But I mean, he's a interesting player to look at. Like, you look at a lot of his stats, and I mean, I'll go through some of them right here, some stuff that jumped out to me, but just the basics. Averaged 8.7 points, 2.5 assists, 2.3 rebounds, half a steal, zero point 0.3 of a block, on 45.1% from the field, 35.7% from three, 82.6% from the free throw line for his career. So pretty solid numbers for a backup guard. I don't think that's anything to uh, really, scoff at. I think he's pretty good. He spent 5 years with Philly and then signed with Minnesota this year, and then was traded to Detroit for Monty Morris. He hasn't shot the ball particularly well in either of the spots he landed this year. So that's a little concerning. Like he was shooting, I think it was like 27% from three with Minnesota in limited minutes. And that's not fantastic. I'll get to the limited minutes thing in just a sec. But, there's some concern about potentially keeping this guy in a breaking case of emergency role because it seems like that's not just something that he thrives with. But he did put up his second best number from three in Philly last year, which was 37.8% on 2 attempts per game. So that's pretty good. I mean, if he can maintain that and do that and be a good like spot up shooter with the bench unit and maybe initiate a little bit, maybe there's a chance where he could be a player that the Knicks rely on a little bit here. I mean, certainly, if he could do better than say Alec Burks has been doing right now, I mean, it would kind of stink because I was excited to get Alec Burks back and what he brings to the team and all that. But if the Knicks find themselves saying, "Hey, maybe we're better off without him in the rotation," I wouldn't totally blame them because I think that Burks is just not playing all that well at this point. And you could probably justify sitting him at this point, despite the investment in him. I think that Bogdanovich is making more of a case of at least being an efficient scorer. So, if you only play him like 20 to 25 minutes a game because you're concerned with his defense or whatever, he can at least go out there and get you like 18 points in 25 minutes. Whereas Burks is not really giving you that. So if Shake can offer something in that regard, plus a little more competent of ball handling as like a lead ball handler type guy, then maybe he actually takes Burks' spot and it ends up the best addition the Knicks get from Detroit is off the waiver wire, at least in terms of what they can offer as like a backup ball handler. He was part of some pretty crazy lineups Shake was last year that did pretty well. So the lineup with DeAnthony Melton, Shake, Tobias Harris, PJ Tucker, and Montrezl Harrell was a plus 11.3 in net rating and 116 possessions together. And then he was in a lineup with Tyrese Maxey, himself, Matisse Thybulle, Georges Niang, and Montrezl Harrell, and they were a plus 7.7 and 191 possessions. So he played well with the bench unit in Philly last year. So that's a plus. I mean, he didn't play as much in Philly last year, which is probably why he was looking for a new home this coming year, but or this past year, I should say. But it's good to see that he plays well with that type of player because that's probably who he'd be playing with on the Knicks. For whatever it's worth, too, the last 2 years prior to this year, he wasn't really part of anything positive when he and Joel Embiid shared the floor. It was generally net negative lineups, and I think the worst one was last year. They were like a minus 30 in the time that he and Joel Embiid shared the floor together, which was basically Shake playing with the starters or whatever. So that might track with the general belief that unless he's getting big minutes, which he definitely won't unless it was like a really depleted roster situation, Shake can't really find a rhythm. So that's pretty much something you see everywhere. If you go on like Reddit, for example, which I do like to do, I like to go kind of like take the pulse of what fans think about a player and whatever, because fans watch all the games and can give you like the quick and easy lowdown on a player. And most people seem to say like unless he's getting lots of minutes with a depleted team that has a few injuries or whatever, it's hard for him to just go out there and play like 10 minutes and have an impact, which sounds honestly like a sort of a knockoff J.R. Smith, I guess, if you want to say, like, because J.R. Smith kind of always went through that too, where if he got enough minutes to sort of figure himself out, like he could really give you a good impact, when he was like on the Knicks, for example. And then if you were playing him smaller minutes, it was tougher for him to find a rhythm, and he just never seemed to really be a great like ultra small minute role player. So yeah, that seems to be the case with Shake. So I guess we'll see how that goes with the Knicks. But I will say Tibbs is maybe one of the best coaches in the NBA at giving a player a role and having them just do that. So maybe he's able to kind of crack the code with Shake. Although I think Tibbs is really more the big whisperer than the guard whisperer. But maybe Johnny Bryant then could do something with him. I don't know. Either way, his assist percentage was tied for the best of his career last year at 20.2%. So that bodes well if the Knicks decide to use him more as a backup ball handler. He also got to the rim pretty well last year. He finished 63% there after finishing 62% the year before. And that was his best 2 years at the rim given the volume. Granted, not a ton of volume, 103 attempts in 2 years ago, and then 169 attempts last year. So still not a ton of attempts at the rim, but at least when he's getting there, he seems to be finishing. Definitely on defense, seems like he's decent to bad, which is not great. So if they plan on playing him any, it would probably be best to pair him with Deuce rather than Burks. That also tracks with, if you look at that lineup where he played with DeAnthony Melton last year and played really well. I think that tracks with saying, okay, you could probably throw him out there with Deuce and he'd be pretty good because, that's another like combo guy. Like they would both essentially be like combo guards that can kind of handle the ball a bit. DeAnthony Melton isn't like a pure point either, and sort of shares some similarities with Deuce in how he's utilized as like sort of a undersized two or like a regular sized one who's maybe not the most talented ball handler in the world. So yeah, I think that would be a solid combo if they run out Deuce and Shake Milton. But if he's is he going to step in right away and do something? I don't think so. Um, and Brunson's not going to be out too long now. It seems like so he could just sort of be the backup or third string point guard, and I think that would be totally fine. I'd say you just gotta hope if he's called on that he could play better than he has so far this season because he's been pretty brutal, if you look at the minutes that he's played this year so far. So yeah, I think it's just gonna come down to can he play a small role? And if not, then he'll probably just sit at the end of the bench for the rest of the year. But, at least he's good to have there as a guy who has played some big minutes and has started some games for a good team in spots and stuff like that. It's always good to have another player like that. So I think the Knicks have secured a guy like that in Shake Milton. But that's not the only player that they signed. They officially signed Jacob Toppen to a two-way deal and now are going to have a little bit of interesting roster turn at the end of the roster potentially. So I'll get into that in just a moment. But first, I have to let you all know about FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. And you can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. And I'll tell you what, I think the same game parlays might be the way to go, especially for tonight's game. Let me just tell you, I will be placing a number of small same game parlays that could potentially hit big because that's kind of the fun of that is you can turn a little bit of money into a whole lot of money if you pick the right sort of outlier things to happen in a game. And with the Knicks banged up, if Jalen Brunson doesn't play especially, I don't know if the odds makers will be able to set proper overs for what could potentially happen for Dante DiVincenzo, for Josh Hart, things of that nature. So you could shoot high on those and say, oh, I think Josh Hart is going to get like 12 plus rebounds. I think he's going to get 8 plus assists. I think that Dante DiVincenzo is going to have 6 plus made threes. I mean, we've seen what happens with this team when Jalen Brunson is out and when they're as injured as they are. And it's Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo do a lot of work. So you can potentially win yourself a lot of money if you go ahead and play the same game parlays and can build a ticket that is a bunch of unlikely things to happen all having to happen at once. All of a sudden your odds go from like plus 800 to like plus 15,000 or something. And you find yourself with a huge opportunity to win a bunch of money for not a high bet. So that's certainly what I'm going to be doing tonight. So if you want to and do all those other things I mentioned, just visit fanduel.com/locked on and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, and I'm back in to finish off the roster news. There's just a little more roster churn going on at the end here, and then we can get back to basketball and maybe see Jalen Brunson play. 50-50 shot is not getting any more believable to me. It's still just bizarre. When he comes back on the court, it's gonna, I don't know, it's gonna feel like a religious experience or something. Like how did you go from that to back on the court in like a couple days? I don't understand. Either way, Jacob Toppen officially signs a two-way deal with the Knicks. So that's good to see. Still treating the Toppen family well, in a way. I guess you could say that maybe the Knicks did not treat Obi Toppin the best on his way out, with not being able to find playing time or whatever, but they did good by him by shipping him out. And now they've been employing his brother all year, and he's been playing really well in the G League. So I think that he deserves this. I mean, 22 points, 9 rebounds, 2.5 assists in the G League this season. He's also been doing it with good efficiency across the board. I think he's shooting like 37% on 5 threes per game, which is really solid as well. So and he's doing his thing. He looks honestly every time I watch him in the G League, I'm like, I feel like there is definitely an outline of a player that could play in the NBA at some point here. Like he shares a lot of similarities to how Obi plays, and yet sometimes also looks a little more fluid um, than Obi did, which I don't think that he's quite the player that Obi is right this second, but he's a good deal younger and still has room to grow. So I think it's smart for the Knicks to go for him on a two-way deal. Hopefully you can have him the rest of this year and then have him on a two-way next year as well. Get more of a good look at him, hopefully try to develop him some. And, maybe he ends up being like a decent backup four or something. Granted, I don't know for sure where he finds playing time with this team because I imagine they're probably going to re-sign Precious Achiuwa. They obviously have Julius Randle locked in already. They should have OG Anunoby locked in after this summer. Josh Hart plays occasional backup four. So, the minutes are slim, especially on a team that after this offseason might be looking to contend more. But also maybe the Knicks, make a big trade that depletes their roster a bit. And then, Jacob Toppin is able to kind of work his way in and potentially claim a roster spot and then a rotation spot if the Knicks, kind of blow like half their roster in one trade and get a big star back or something and find themselves in need of depth, maybe that works. So I don't know for sure if he'll fully come together in the NBA, but he definitely deserves some runway to try. And I'm glad that the Knicks, locked Toppin up and seem to be, committing to developing him at least the rest of this year and maybe going forward. So I guess we'll see there. I also will wait to see. I mean, they have worked second year options into two-way deals before, so that's not unprecedented. So maybe that's something that they do as well. Maybe they put a second year option in there so they can potentially pick him up this offseason if they want to. I don't know what the case will be there, but either way, good for Jacob Toppin, good for the Knicks because I think he is a talent. I think he's the guy that inspires me the most out of their two-way guys as someone who could potentially be an NBA player. Of course, he also joins Charlie Brown Jr. and Dwayne Washington Jr. joins the juniors as the other two ways on the Knicks. So those slots are now once again filled. But the Knicks still find themselves one roster spot short of the required 14 now after signing Shake Milton. And Fred Katz, the Athletic, noted that. He also noted that Daquan Jeffries was just on a 10-day contract. So I think if you sign someone to a 10-day contract and then they expire, that sort of just continually resets that clock to get that roster minimum set up and everything there. So they could just keep signing guys to 10 days for the rest of the season, which I think would help them in terms of luxury tax and all that stuff. They might also just at a certain point, contracts are prorated when guys, sign them. So there is a possibility that, Jeffries signs another 10-day if he's able to, and then the Knicks just wait as long as they can and then sign him for the rest of the season at the veterans minimum. Um, I don't know exactly how that works. I think Jeremy Cohen, our buddy at the Coincidence on Twitter, has gotten into this with his theory on how the Knicks could just, use that last roster spot to just churn guys in and out through the end of the season and save a bunch of money that way on potential luxury tax bills and stuff. That's about the point of the CBA where I start falling asleep in class and stop caring so much. So yeah, I'll leave that to the experts. But um, it does seem like maybe they'll give some money to their G leaguers and stuff too. I mean, I will say the Knicks are good about using extra roster spots and stuff like that to just take care of players and give some guys that might not necessarily get as much money throughout the year playing for the G League team or whatever some more money. We see them always do that at the beginning of the season too with Exhibit 10 contracts. Where they sign guys to these quick deals and then cut them almost immediately, which then gives them the ability to make more money in the G League. So maybe that's the Knicks' goal here. I guess we'll see. But I do think it's pretty safe to say that the Knicks have more or less set the roster of guys they expect to potentially contribute. this year. And so going into the postseason, as long as everybody is able to get healthy, which again, looks like we're headed that direction, pending Mitchell Robinson updates. But you could potentially going into the postseason with your roster looking like Brunson starting at point guard, then Dante DiVincenzo, OG Anunoby, Julius Randle, Isaiah Hartenstein as your starting lineup. Maybe some of you listening, I see YouTube comments being like, Mitch is the starter. It's not iHeart. Okay, I don't really care which one you think is the starter. I mean, one of those two will be starting. The other will be backing that person up. I think that Hartenstein, based off how things went in January, earned himself a starting spot with this particular starting lineup because it was just absolutely lethal. And I think his skills mesh a little better with like OG, for example, and his ability to do those backdoor cuts and all that stuff. So I would probably go with Hartenstein. Either way, once you start looking at the bench, you have Mitchell Robinson or Isaiah Hartenstein coming off the bench, Josh Hart, Bojan Bogdanovic, Precious Achua, and Deuce McBride, I think, has probably played himself into some bench minutes there as well. And then you have Alec Burks, Shake Milton, and Jericho Sims as emergency options. I mean, that's a really deep roster, I think, at this point. I think you're at the point where this team, we said this after the trade deadline, but now especially with that Shake edition, this is one of the deepest teams in the league. So things look to be going the right direction health wise. The schedule is not super hard through when those guys should hopefully be back from injury. That West Coast swing gets a little dicey, but it's not the end of the world. If the Knicks can just kind of maintain a 500 pace or so, that seems to be about what everybody else is doing as far as their contemporaries are concerned. In that race for the 3, 4, 5, 6 seed. So we'll see what ends up happening. But I like the Knicks' chances if they can get 15 games full strength to end the season. They'll beat up on the bad teams still, and they certainly have some bad teams coming up, and they'll get some decent tune-up games towards the end of the season to kind of make sure that they're ready to go. So we'll see how all that goes. We'll see if Brunson plays tonight. So not much more can be said on that. We just got to kind of wait for the final injury report and see what he does practicing for the game. But till next time, thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you all soon. Peace out, everybody.